So good afternoon, or for you, I guess it's good evening, right? We say
Yes,
bracha v'shalom, blessings and greetings, Shannon.
thank you.
And thank you very much for giving us the time to participate in the Bnei Noach Academy. And I understand that you're in Israel, so I'm here in the States. I'm here actually. I'm speaking to you from Florida. Got quite
Mhm.
warm. Unfortunately, we had some. I said unfortunately, but for me, it's great as having grown up in Brooklyn. But we had a little winter for a couple of days. I'm talking 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Terrible, huh?
Yikes.
Right.
Yikes.
You're in Israel. So what's it like there? What is the when I say like what's the weather like? That's not just a mundane question. I mean, spiritually also. What is the weather like? What is it like in Israel?
It's interesting that you say it like that. Literally, it's very cold for this Texas girl. Um, but spiritually, I'm in Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. It's Israel, and we're connected directly to the source. So I tell many people that it's spiritually easier in Israel, but physically harder. And I think a lot of your viewers probably identify with that if they've been on this same journey like I have.
Wow, that's very interesting. Is it okay to ask you where particularly in Israel do you live?
I live just south of Jerusalem, right in the middle.
Okay, so you're in the heart. The heart, Jerusalem is the heart of Israel, right? Literally.
Definitely.
So it's the heart. But you know what? I have actually a question that always intrigues me. And living in Jerusalem, if I may, I know this goes off a little bit from the path that we scheduled or planned to go on. But you talk about Jerusalem, it being the heart and being the heart, the warmth of this, spiritually speaking. But I'm sure there's another side to Jerusalem too. How does that affect you for somebody who came to look for spirituality and for inspiration? And you see that there's I say the holy and maybe perhaps the unholy.
I try to see a positive in all of it. I go into, I guess, the busiest night and what people would say is uh is the party night in Jerusalem. I see beauty in that too, because you go into the middle of Jerusalem and you see religious Jews, not religious Jews. You see all types, and that's inspiring to me also. And I think when I look at the youth, on all spectrums of Jewish life, when they're hanging out and just have a place to just be together, I think that's beautiful. And in America, we're worried about our teens and what they're off doing and what they're going to get involved in. Are they going to meet somebody Jewish? Are they going to um, get in a relationship that they shouldn't be in? At least in Israel, they're surrounded by Jews. They're going to find somebody Jewish, and there are outreaches and opportunities for kids to get together everywhere. There's just so much to do and be, and it really is gives you a way to teach a love for Klal Israel, for all of Israel, not just one type of Jew or in one community, which we're often forced to be in America.
Wow, that's intriguing. So let me ask you a question, especially that this is geared for the Ben Noach, for the non-Jew, right?
Mm-hmm.
And certainly the Ben Noach would come to Israel. And this is something which, and tell me if you agree with this, I always say this to people. Unfortunately, my only opportunity to share this with people is at a funeral, when I officiate at funerals. And I explain to them why all humanity typically gravitates for one reason or another. Most of them, even without even realizing why, they gravitate to Jerusalem. And I say because the Talmud tells us that when God was ready to create the first human beings, He took the earth from Mount Moriah, right, from the place. To quote the sages, He says, "Man was created from the place of His atonement." Right. So all essentially we all come from Adam and Eve, unless I say people insist that they want to, have a pedigree coming from apes. That's their business. But you and I know that we come from Adam and Eve, so we all, I would say, gravitate to Israel, to Jerusalem. Many people find it a place of inspiration. So what you just said, how would that apply to a non-Jew coming to Israel and seeing in many ways? You see secular, you see religious, you see inspirational, maybe the opposite. How would you, present that? And I know you have a positive look on it, but how would you give it to them?
I think people from all over feel inspired and alive in Jerusalem. They talk a lot about that Jerusalem syndrome, um, and that. And I really think when I say that I'm connected directly to the source, I really think that there is a source of power here and connection that Jews and non-Jews feel very much. When you're out in America, I've heard lots of people say, how can you stand to live in Israel? There's so much, terrorism and you're constantly under threat and war. When people come to Israel, that is not what they feel at all. Christians, all religions, non-Jews, Jews and Jews, come here and they feel like it is the most peaceful place on earth. I've never heard somebody leave Israel and say that they felt unsafe or scared. It's just not what you feel here.
Wow. Wow. So, going back to something you mentioned before, you said for this Texan girl, you said something in regards to the weather. Can you tell us a little bit? Is it okay to ask you a little bit about yourself, your family, your upbringing, your crucial years, which I say is the teenage years that usually tend to shape you or put you on a trajectory in life? Me, it took I guess I'm a late bloomer. It took me long, you know. So, what can you tell us, in short?
The beginning, I was born into an evangelical Christian family, not just any evangelical family. My father was an Assemblies of God minister, a fundamentalist Christian. 17 years ago, I was dedicated to bringing Jewish people to know about Jesus. As many of your viewers know, there's a war going on right now for Jewish souls. Bringing Jewish people, according to Christianity, to Jesus is what triggers the second coming of Christ. So being part of that mission is something that was ingrained in me from a very young age. I felt a real sense of purpose in it. When the doors of the church were open, I was there. Every group or mission that was available, I was part of. I started the first Christian student union in my high school, and bringing as many people as I possibly could to Jesus was a goal that I set for myself every single day. Of course, I'm here today because my life took a 180-degree turn. Now I'm dedicated to warning Jewish people about the most deceptive tactics that are being employed in this battle for their souls.
Wow. So what I'm hearing you say, and I'm asking myself, and this is something that I just jotted down as you were talking, as I'm listening to you. So you weren't your typical teenager, having fun, going.
No,
You
I
weren't
was
your
I
typical
was
American
nicknamed
teenager.
Bible thumper, and I wore that like a badge of honor. I thought that was a compliment to me.
So you like I said, that's kind of what I got from what you were saying. You're always like in that religious, spiritual world, even at a very young age, when typically teenagers want to, have fun, party, and stuff like that. So you were never in that. That was never something that attracted you.
No, I was a goody goody. I brought my Bible to school and I was going to save everybody, all of my peers. I was going to invite everybody to church, and I was very committed to the church. It's sort of what grounded me and gave me purpose. In those teen years when you're struggling with your identity, the church, Jesus, and my faith was my identity.
Wow. So what made you change? What made you ask? I mean, it seems that you were so certain about it. You were so absolutely sure that this is the right thing, to the extent that you blew away some fun years of teenagerhood and you gave it away for the Bible, for feeling so. And I'm sure it's not easy when everybody's looking at you like you're the cuckoo, of the school, of the class, right? She's the
Right.
right. So you really had it so deep in you. How do you suddenly start asking questions? What happened?
Honestly, I wasn't asking questions. I wasn't looking. I wasn't looking for any answers or any deeper spirituality or any connection. I was very strong in my faith. As a Christian, my world was very simple. It was black and white. There was good and evil. There was truth and a lie. I was taught to believe that the Jews rejected Jesus because of this supernatural veil that they had over their eyes, and they just couldn't see. In my church, we were taught that the Jews had collectively rejected Jesus. They turned their backs on God. They rejected their own Messiah, and worse, they killed him. I was taught that as a follower of Jesus, that it was my mission to bring the knowledge of the Jewish Messiah to the Jewish people, and that if I was faithful in this mission, God was going to remove that supernatural veil that was blinding them, and I would succeed in bringing them to Jesus. To do that, I memorized 365 prophecies in Tanakh that I knew had proved Jesus was the Messiah. I was convinced that all I needed to do was convince a Jewish person to look at the text with me. And if I could do that, that they would see it just as clearly as I did. And that veil was going to be removed. But getting them to look at the text with me was so easy. That was difficult.
Stubborn, huh?
Right. They're stubborn, and Jews don't take kindly to proselytizing. That's sort of that's a red line that you can't cross. So I had to learn more deceptive methods to present the gospel. And unfortunately, I was successful among less affiliated Jews. You asked what was the turning point, and it was my encounter with religious Jews that did that. Religious Jews were not going to fall for my repackaging of Jesus with a Jewish flavor. So when I did manage to get religious Jews to look at the text with me, the responses they came back at me with were shocking. I would rattle off these 365 prophecies that I'd memorized, and they would say things like, "You're taking that verse out of context," or "That's mistranslated. That's not what the Hebrew says." But I was determined, and I took them up on their challenge. I was going to learn the Hebrew. I was going to learn the verses in context. And I didn't fear. I didn't have anything to fear. I had no doubt that I was right and they were wrong. At the same time, I found an audio series by Rabbi Tovia Singer. As you can guess, my world turned upside down. I was knocked off of that high horse that I was on, and I crashed big time. My absolute shock and horror, they were right, and it was me that was wrong. I learned that those verses that I was using to bring Jews to Jesus were in fact mistranslated. They were taken out of context, or in some cases completely made up. And that discovery was earth-shattering. I say it was like an atomic bomb in my life.
Wow. So you know what? As you said that, I'll tell you, you give off a very deep sense of genuine honesty. And I was just curious, and you kind of hit it now with what you just said at the end. I was curious is that, while you were proselytizing to these, like you said, less affiliated Jews who didn't know much about their religion, and you repackage, with the repackaging, that was just a tactic. That was just a method to get to them. Did you have a point where you felt like, this is not honesty, this is not real, or you felt like, the ends justify the means?
It was an ends justify the means, but it was also realizing that the church has done horrific things to the Jewish people. So of course they're defensive, and they have these natural defenses. And in order to be sensitive to their culture, I needed to approach it in a culturally sensitive way. If I were to present Jesus in a very straightforward way, like I would with non-Jews, they would reject it outright. So I had to be sensitive and approach it differently with a Jewish person. I didn't see it as deceptive at the time, but culturally sensitive, I guess.
Got it. And you mentioned something about, the atrocities with the church, over the years, over history, has perpetrated towards the Jews. How did you feel about it, when you were doing, being a good Christian, so to speak. How did you feel about it? Did it ever bother you? I'm just curious. I never got to have this conversation with somebody, in true honesty,
The church's response to that is those weren't real Christians. Anybody who really is a real Christian and knows Jesus and is connected to God at all knows that Jesus loved the Jewish people. He was a Jew himself, and those just aren't real Christians, and we're real Christians.
Got it. Okay, so that was a way of making everybody feel better about the past.
Right. And that wasn't us.
Right. It's not
Similarly,
right.
Jews say it wasn't us who killed Jesus. That was thousands of years
Right.
ago.
Or it was the Romans. We just handed them over. Right. I know. No.
Right.
I hear. Just moving on, because that really wasn't why we got together today. Coming from the background you come from, so you have an appreciation, where people have, I think in general, people who are religiously inclined, at least this is my take, this is my understanding, my feeling, they have like a need to have, rituals and have a sense of community and have, I would say events, if it's spiritual events or prayer events and things like that. We're focused on, delivering the message of the Torah to all, right? To Bnei Noach, which is really what it's about. It's the Torah is not exclusive to the Jews. There's a part of the Torah that's exclusive to the Jews, but we're here for, everyone, to try to make sure that the world, everyone has that opportunity and gets access to learning Torah. But in the other hand, we don't have, quote unquote, churches or houses of worship or places where you can formally come and, whether it is sing, whether it is pray, whether it is, you come together for a class, that's at best. And there aren't any, I would call them, aren't any official rituals and observances. What would you say to the Ben Noach that's seeking an inspiration to have a full spiritual life?
Question. I'll say that I'm not an authority on the Bnei Noach. I'm also not an authority in the Jewish world, and I don't want to pretend to be.
Who are you? We're talking
try to stay in my lane. And
right.
The only thing I can say is my personal experience, the experience of my father, which we haven't mentioned. My father, the Assemblies of God minister, did attempt to bring me back. He wanted to bring me back to Christianity before I converted. And in that process, he started learning the same things that I was learning. And he also left the church. He's no longer a minister. He did choose to be a Ben Noach. And he's involved in a lot of the online communities. He supports me. He comes out to our conferences and hangs out with all of the Bnei Noach. So that's where my experience with the Bnei Noach movement comes from. As far as living their life and how to do things, I think Bnei Noach are some of the most courageous people that I have ever met. I don't think Jewish people understand how much trauma that a person goes through when they leave the church. You abandon absolutely everything that you know to be true, to be anything at your core. Often they leave everybody that they love to embark on this journey. I say this often because people don't tend to grasp it, but I see conversion to Judaism as the easy road. People tend to focus on the lifestyle changes that are required and the restrictions of orthodoxy, but those often pale in comparison to the trauma that a Ben Noach goes through and what they have to deal with. If you compare stories of people who leave a cult, I think it's very similar to what we've been through. They often struggle in how to function and how to deal with society outside of the bubble that they were raised in. I think recognizing the trauma that we've been through is an important step. Realizing that there are aspects of our former life, our life in the church, that we were addicted to, is important. If we can identify the roller coaster of emotions that we're going through as PTSD, and as withdrawal symptoms to an addiction that we had, a community that we were in, a relationship, especially with Jesus, a personal relationship that was just ripped from us. I think if we realize that that's trauma and PTSD and connect those feelings with that we can understand the emotions we're going through and find healthy outlets and ways to fill that void as we go through this journey.
Wow. So it's amazing. As you said the words, I wrote it down, trauma, leaving the church. The first thought that came to mind, and you actually basically confirmed it with what you said, but the first thought that came to my mind is she saying that her dad actually went through or was having a greater challenge than she has? In other words, you converted to Judaism, which, tell me if I'm wrong, and I humbly say this because I don't know firsthand, certainly not even secondhand, what you're describing, both your experience and your dad's experience or the Ben Noach's experience. But the thought that came to my mind was, well, she went kind of from one bubble to another bubble. That was her choice, and she embraced it. But her dad is kind of like in no man's land, and he's got to figure it out. And in the one hand, that's wrong, but there's nothing there to replace it. And that really was my question. You kind of explained my question with your answer. I'm just using my imagination, and I'm thinking like, we all grow up with, it's the tastes of the holidays, it's the foods, it's the flavors, the smells, the like you said, if it's going to church, the camaraderie, and suddenly that's all gone. So what happens
Right.
with Ben Noach?
It's
That's
devastating. It is. And I hear so much pain in the voice of people who are going through this. And it's hard. And it really is. Sometimes I recommend trauma therapy. It really is traumatic. When you imagine what a Christian has grown up in from a baby, we're taught that there is no gauge of sin. There's no big sin versus a little sin. Committing murder is the same as stealing a cookie out of the cookie jar. And that sin is what was responsible for the beating and crucifixion of Jesus. Jesus died for you and because of you. The guilt that comes with that is horrific. And the fear of hell, that if I do something wrong, if I don't ask forgiveness for my sin, if I do something that I'm not supposed to, or if I'm wrong, I'm going to go to hell. I'm going to have eternal damnation and eternity in fire. When you're, as a teenager, shown films about the tribulation, and if you deny Jesus under pressure, you're going to get the guillotine, and you're going to miss the rapture if you're not right with God at the moment that he comes in the blink of an eye, and everybody disappears and you're left behind. That's a tremendous amount of fear. And I think in nowadays, I believe if people looked at it that way, it's a form of abuse, and it's definitely trauma that we've been through. And there are aspects that we felt were good. The sense of community. Everybody has a natural desire to belong to something, to feel part of something, to be accepted and loved unconditionally. And that was very fulfilling. And that was what we loved about the church. So when you come out of the church, those things that were good things, you miss. You can be in a very bad, abusive relationship, but I'm sure that when you leave, that's often why battered women go back, is there is a sense of
familiarity,
comfort and
familiar with your comfort, right?
Right. But it's, if you look at it as an addiction and say, I recognize that, and those are parts that I miss, and it's a void, you can fill it in healthy ways, which don't have to always be religious. My father joined a Jeep club, a whiskey club, a bridge club, a book club. I
like the whiskey part.
Right. There's all kinds. That's difficult coming from the church. That was a hurdle that had to be
a vice, right?
done. But there are all kinds of social connections that you can find that don't have to be religiously based. Because of where we come from, we feel that it needs to be religiously based, but those connections don't have to, come from religious environments.
So I just want to mirror kind of in a summary what I'm hearing for you, that there's a kind of two issues here. There's the trauma aspect, and you say that should be dealt with professionally, just like anybody would deal with any other trauma that they went through in life, because it's legitimate trauma. You said PTSD, I heard you say, but you said the other thing, the good part that's now missing, to have the void to try to fill it. Would you suggest? I know you said you're not an authority, but to me, you're somebody, having the experiences you had. Certainly, your opinion, to me at least, plays a big role. Would you suggest in any way that there should maybe perhaps be, again, with the proper guidance by those who do know, who are authorities, to kind of create some kind of Bnei Noach movement in which there is an answer to those voids, to fill those voids that, would you suggest that? I mean, you have ever thought of that?
Definitely. But I do believe in a big way that Bnei Noach should attach themselves somehow to Torah learning, to the Jewish community. I know it's different than joining the Jewish nation, but they are following the Jewish religion. And thank God there's so many resources out there for learning Torah and for Bnei Noach and communities online. I know I'm involved in a lot of them. We have a lot of social things that we can do online. It's not that in-person religious connection that we're used to, but I think there are so many great rabbis to learn from. Chabad is a great resource. I know Aish, there are plenty of outreaches that have online learning from amazing rabbis. What's available today is unbelievable.
Wow. So okay, so you're saying there shouldn't be, if I hear you correctly, there shouldn't be an elaborate, so to speak, planned structure to fill that void. In other words, each person should study Torah, cling to their connection with God, but not to create any elaborate movement. In other words, do you see a danger in that? If somebody was to say, okay, I'm going to create a Ben Noach, I don't know, call it a synagogue, Ben Noach temple, would you see an issue with that? Would you find that dangerous?
Again, I'm not an authority in that, but
your opinion.
I'm very much an advocate for somehow finding a way to attach themselves to the Jewish people.
To Jewish people.
Yes.
So what would that look like? I'm trying to just get a visual. What would that look like? Would that look like, say, a Ben Noach family attending synagogue and Shabbat, knowing that they're not part of the minyan, they're not counted in the quorum, but still they're there and enjoying the atmosphere, the environment, the spirituality? Would that be something you're suggesting?
If the rabbi or the community will do that, yes. And I think Bnei Noach are always on a search for what their direction is. And I think if you go to a synagogue and say, I'm learning Torah, and I'm not sure of where I'm going or the path that I'm taking, but I've left this and I'm looking. I have a lot of questions and I'm just looking for answers, and I just want to see what's here.
All right, but I kind of thinking, as you're saying that, if that happens, then essentially what it is it's really almost been Bnei Noach becoming a segue to encouraging conversion to Judaism, which we're not about. We're not looking to encourage anyone to, and I'm sure you've gone through your hurdles personally when you did decide to convert to Judaism, right? So what if we were to offer that or provide that to the Ben Noach, essentially with time, we're basically encouraging them to, if they come and they like what they see in the synagogue and they can become more and more part of it, eventually they're going to want to convert. So it's just a means, it's another marketing tool, if I may, albeit a subconscious one, to get them to convert, no?
They would be learning Torah authentically. They would be connecting. But it's really up to each individual to choose to take on all of the mitzvot and join the Jewish nation, because that is not necessary. And Jewish people discourage conversion. They don't make it easy. It's not an easy process.
Like we said earlier, they're stubborn, so they can make it quite hard, right?
Right, but you do want to make an informed decision, and you don't want them to be attracted to all the nice things, and they need to know what they're getting into.
Can we go back, if you don't mind, to someone like your dad, right? How's your relationship today, A? And B, how does he feel? Is he fulfilled now, having gone through the transition and left with you? And I give him a lot of credit. I don't know if I would have had the courage, the strength to make that choice. And I say this humbly, even if I saw the truth and I realized what I've been doing till now is wrong. Wow, I would like to meet him one day. Just to me, sounds like a very courageous man and a man of principle. You know, when he believed one thing, okay, that's what he followed. As soon as he realized that that was wrong, he had the car. I don't know if I have it in me. I would like to believe that I do. So again, back to the questions. What's your relationship like today? And how does he feel? Like, is he really, fulfilled? Is he, accomplished and spiritually and so on?
I have a great relationship with my father. He's been to Israel a few times. Like I said, we have a yearly conference for Bnei, where Bnei Noach come from all around the U.S. And get together, and he's very supportive of that and comes out. He struggles. He does. He often talks about my interviews and says, that point where you say that you were going through a crisis of faith, and then you chose the path to Judaism. He says, I'm still very much in that crisis mode. And he does feel the PTSD, the withdrawal from the addiction of that community. But he recognizes it as that. And like I said, he's filled those voids with a lot of other things. He has a very full life and is socially involved in lots of different areas. And he's connected to online communities of Bnei Noach.
Wow. I didn't hear you mention anything about your mom, so I'm just wondering if it's okay to go there. Where's your mom in all this?
My mom was not so accepting. Church, you're taught that if you reject Jesus, you're going to hell, and there is no redemption, no salvation for somebody who's rejected Jesus. Jewish people just don't know better, because they're blind. But somebody who was and knew and leaves, there's no forgiveness for that. You're not accepted in that community anymore, especially in the more religious. There are verses in the New Testament that forbid them from having anything to do with you. There are verses in the New Testament that say you can't be unequally yoked with an unbeliever. You can't open your door to somebody who denies Christ. You can't allow them to sit at your table. One who denies Christ is the Antichrist. So I was the devil. It's not a nice, let's agree to disagree kind of friendship anymore. It's very hostile. So when that was the decision I made, my mother was devastated. She knew that I was going to hell, and I was taking her grandchildren with me. She didn't speak to me for a few years. Eventually, she came around. We have a relationship today. I visit her when I go to Houston. Get along, we talk, but there is an elephant in the room that we're both very careful not to speak about, and that's okay.
But what did that do to your parents? In terms of their relationship, in terms of them getting along?
They're divorced
Because of this, as a result of this?
Not because of this. They actually were divorced already. So I went through my disclosing this to them separately. And she she looked at a little bit of what I was looking at when I was trying to convince her and tell her why I was doing this. And she said, this was just a way she had lived her life, all her life. I compared it to the Matrix, like I had been unplugged and suddenly see the truth. And she said, plug me back in. I don't want it.
I don't want this, right?
And it was actually painful for her. She cried the first time she saw my son say, make Kiddush. And it really, it destroyed our family in many ways. At first, that statement hurt me because I wasn't destroying our family. I didn't see it that way. I didn't see it any differently than if somebody were to choose to be a vegetarian. It was something that affected me, not everybody. But she was right. When, just like in the Jewish world, our community and our family is very much focused on the holidays, on meals, on get-togethers, which are all religiously based or around food, which now I keep kosher, and I can't go for Christmas or Thanksgiving and observe their religious holidays. So I wasn't part of those anymore. So in many ways, she was right. It did destroy the family, and painful.
Wow. So, I mean, you answered so many questions without even me asking the questions, but a question that's still throbbing at my mind is, and this I actually have been asked fairly recently by one of the people that listens to some of my videos. I sent out these little clips. I said, something essentially to the effect, could I study Torah? Could I be a good Ben Noach and at the same time still accept, Jesus as a Messiah, as a Savior? Not as a God. He says, I'm not a Trinitarian. I don't believe, but still as a human being, but still something I believe in. What would you respond? I honestly, Brooklyn boy, having grown up in a Orthodox Chabad background, I answered what I knew, but I want to hear it from you.
I would say absolutely not. And I think to think so, that's offensive to me. Every concept in Christianity, accepting Jesus as the Messiah, is directly opposed in the Jewish scriptures. The only way to make any Christian beliefs work is to mistranslate, to manipulate, or to take things out of context in our Tanakh. It absolutely does not work. And to say that it's okay to eat of a body and drink of the blood, even symbolically, is an abomination. Human sacrifice is an abomination. To worship a man as God, to worship anybody alongside God, is idolatry. To worship this multiple person Godhead is idolatry. And to say that it's workable at all is just, I see why Jews are offended by it. I'm offended by it simply because I know Christianity. To say that a Ben Noach can believe in Jesus, I think that's the same deception that's being taught in the Messianic movement, to just wrap Jesus up in whatever culture or label you want to put on it. And I do know that there are a lot of Messianics who are claiming to observe the 7 Noachide laws and taking that name. And I know there's a big dispute among genuine Bnei Noach that don't want to use that name anymore. Noahide has sort of been abused in many ways, just like the Messianics calling themselves, rabbis and Messianic Judaism. It's not Judaism. And accepting Jesus as the Messiah, or saying that you can be Christian and Noahide at the same time is like saying, it's just, it doesn't work.
Right. So I want to touch upon that. You said about the Messianic, and I know it's no secret that you are at the forefront of, combating that, especially with your background and everything and everything you've been through. What can you tell us about it? In other words, what should the Ben Noach be on the alert for, because they don't know. They're innocently looking for Torah. They're innocently looking for inspiration. What can they, what kind of, I guess, detection system should they have to, detect, right from wrong, light from darkness when it comes to that?
I think if you learn to measure up everything that you learn about with Torah, with Tanakh, and anything that doesn't align with Torah or Tanakh, to reject it outright. If a rabbi is teaching something that fundamentally opposes Tanakh or is not in Torah, I think you're listening to the wrong person. And it's, I know many Bnei Noach, when they start this path, have a trust in anything Jewish and every rabbi, and look up to it. And you can also often go, from one abuse to another abuse, and that's unfortunate. But there are dangers in the Jewish world, just like there are in any other. There are good and bad, just like any other.
So Yisana, you said something about anything that's not consistent with the Tanakh. That's assuming that your average Ben Noach, which I can't say for myself, is so well versed in Tanakh that as soon as you make a statement, you say it's from the Talmud or you say it's from the Midrash, and they would be able to immediately detect that, oh, no, that is in opposition or in contradiction to a known verse in the Tanakh. I can't say that I know the Tanakh that well. So that
Right.
be your practical method for your average Ben Noach.
It's a learning process, but it's that rude awakening that we experienced in the church, that blind following a doctrine or a theology, is what got us where we are now. And I think Bnei Noach have to be careful not to do that blind following, and to really look at it themselves, learn it themselves, and maybe not from one source. Listen to different opinions. In Judaism, different from Christianity, we're encouraged to ask questions. We're encouraged to argue things out and say, but that doesn't match up with this, and argue it out. Present those questions respectfully, but question everything.
Wow. So I want to go to the name of your organization, Bnei. What's behind it? I know what Bnei means. Literally means amongst us, between us. But
between us is the translation, and it sort of has two meanings. Our organization partners with Jewish organizations in combating the influence of evangelical Christianity. We help Jewish organizations establish boundaries and guidelines in interfaith relationships. So between us, meaning the relationship between us and Jewish organizations, but at the same time, I happen to was one of them. So like a close friendship, when you, in slang terms, Bnei means like, between us,
yeah.
I know what you're really about, or between us, let's talk about this honestly, which is really what Bnei is calling for. We're calling for honesty and integrity and respect in this relationship between evangelicals and the Jewish world, because the deception that's being used right now is certainly not respectful. It's not honest, and Christians want to have a relationship with Jews. And as long as there's deception and there's this underlying secret agenda, we can't have that.
So are you saying the Christians generally want to have a relationship with the Jews, or they want to have a relationship with Jews because they have an objective?
There are many Christians who are very sincere. I do believe they're sincere and they want that relationship. But when there's an underlying agenda, honest about that.
Right.
And they're not at the moment,
When you say
especially
they,
in these deceptive tactics.
right, when you say they, you're talking about the leaders, right? The heads, the people who kind of produce the propaganda. I mean, I'm assuming, and tell me, correct me if I'm wrong, that the average person is more or less genuine and honest. You know, your average person doesn't seek to be dishonest. You know, they're being led by their leaders. Is that the case, or every single one of them?
It is not just the leaders. When I say the word missionary, you probably think of the leaders, a big organization with pamphlets or people that are on the street handing out these tracts. But the successful missionaries are not those people. The successful missionaries are the lay people, the everyday church goers, the friend at work, the college roommate. Those are the successful missionaries. And every evangelical is taught to be a missionary. Every evangelical is told that this is their mission. And they do. They are sincere. They are loving. They do love you, but there's a reason for that love. And you fulfill a very important role in their theology. It's ideological for them.
Wow. So I know more recently there was some really, let me just say, some explosive stories in Israel where some families who were well integrated already into the Orthodox community, I'm talking about the ultra Orthodox community, were found out. First of all, did you have, if you may, I don't know if you can talk about it, did you have a hand in that? A, and B, what can you tell us about that?
Yes, we were
you
we were
pivotal?
the ones
Yeah.
exposing many of them. They were just shocking for the Jewish community, not so shocking for the counter missionary world, but it was shocking for the public to learn about them. We had a rabbi in French Hill who was exposed. He was portraying himself as a rabbi. He actually got smicha. He was a sofer. He was a mohel. He claimed to be a kohen. He was, performing Jewish rituals. He was writing Sefer Torah, ketubos. He was performing weddings. He was doing a tremendous amount of things, damage in the Jewish world. After that, there was 2 more couples that were found in Israel that were students of his that were exposed in America. There was the father-son duo that were performing weddings, conversions. The worst was they were giving divorces in the Jewish community. Devastating halachic ramifications. It was very difficult to unravel that, and it was shocking to the Jewish community, especially the more insular Jewish communities, the Orthodox world, who really thought that they were immune, and were sure that there's no way a missionary could get in here. But sure enough, they were, and not only just sitting in the same row davening with you, they were taking leadership positions, and
So
shocking.
These are real imposters, because you said something and I didn't know this. I assumed that all these people were known converts who kind of made it up the ranks, all in a certain, with the guise of being real Jews. Well, you said something to the effect that the person claimed to be a Kohen. Once you claim to be a Kohen of the priestly family, that's a lineage. So he didn't even come with the pretense of being a convert. This was somebody who kind of infiltrated, right? And that's my question. Where's the vulnerability? How did they get in? In other words, I know for myself, and you know how the Orthodox community works. If I know a rabbi, I know which yeshiva he went to, which Talmudical seminary, when he got ordained. How did that happen? How do you close those holes?
they're not trying to get through the conversion process. There was a time where there was lots of questions about the conversion process and people trying to get through and how to ask the right questions to weed out the infiltrators. But that's too difficult. It's much easier to just show up at a community and say you're Jewish. If a person comes in to a shul dressed like a chassid, nobody's asking if he's Jewish. If he joins the Daf Yomi, nobody's asking if he's Jewish, and he stays there and builds a relationship with the rabbi. Nobody thinks twice. And then all of a sudden he wants to get married and asks the rabbi for a letter. There are very good outreach focused rabbis who want to do anything to help a fellow Jew. If you come into a shul and say that you're a Baal Tshuva, that's incredible. And you automatically have a rabbi that will do anything and go to great lengths to help you. And that by saying you're about tshuva, that explains the language difference, that explains the fact that they didn't have a yeshiva upbringing. It explains a lot away if they don't have everything or pronounce everything perfectly or haven't learned like a from birth Jew.
Wow. So you're saying essentially what you're saying is any community is vulnerable.
Every community is vulnerable. Yeah. And
how do you protect yourself? How does one protect themselves?
It needs to not be uncomfortable to ask questions. Like most Jewish people play Jewish geography the second you walk into a room and you find out who's related to who and who's friends with who. When we started this conversation, we did the same thing. Right. And these people learn to build up a fake Jewish history. And often if you do any looking back, or if you see any red flags in that, or strange things in their stories, or they're not so forthcoming about something, it's a red flag and you should follow up on it. I did follow up on pretty much every rabbi that one missionary name dropped. Went and followed up and found out there really wasn't a relationship there. It was just a fake history. The Dawsons really became part of the community and got rabbis to vouch for them along the way and give them fake documents, all with the story of we're about tshuva. We didn't have a proper wedding. Could you give us a new ketubah and do a chuppah for us? And the rabbi did. Wow. And just saying, I don't have a connection with my family anymore. I'm returning. And
so would you say
if you make Aliyah to Israel, you have to prove your Jewish identity. Me as a convert, I have to be ready to show my conversion papers anywhere I go. I just applied for my kid to go to summer camp and they want copies of my conversion documents. And it needs to be not personal, but procedural. And I think rabbis can definitely say that there's been a history of this. It's not personal, it's procedural. You're not asking for this, to be counted as a minyan, but certainly if they're going to take any type of leadership role, if they're going to be working in kashrut, things like that, they definitely need to be sure of their Jewish identity.
As you're speaking, I'm thinking, so are you essentially saying that at least at some level, not willingly, not knowingly, some of these rabbis along the way are culpable because they didn't do their due diligence, either lack of knowledge or lack of suspicion, or perhaps
I don't like to say that the rabbis were culpable, but in a way, I guess they were. But their chesed and their willingness to help,
eagerness,
their willingness to help, they're kind, loving people that was grossly taken advantage of. The hostage situation that happened in Texas, in a synagogue in Texas, it was somebody who was invited into the shul. They thought they were homeless. They invited them in and gave them drink and gave them some of the food from the kiddush. That kindness that Jewish people have and our tendency to see the good in people is being grossly taken advantage of. In many ways, it sort of like destroys our innocence. But I do think we do need to be more aware, and we do need to have a suspect approach to certain situations, and
I always
be
quote
careful.
I always quote the Talmud. And this I always, even people tell me, "Oh, Rabbi, I met another Jewish person." I have to say, even unfortunately, sometimes tell me a religious person, a business, whatever it is, and I tell them always, and it rhymes both in the original language of the Talmud and in English. I say, "Kabdeu v'chashdeu," respect him
Exactly.
and suspect him. But I tell you what,
Right.
and I can concur the feelings of what you're saying. I can't. I'm looking back at myself. How many times was I eager to help another person, and maybe perhaps I didn't do my due diligence. Now you kind of giving me like, wow, you gotta. I can't see a red flag in a person, but you have to start at least be able to see a red flag in another person. You know what I mean? I can't say that I do.
I'm guilty of the same thing
Okay.
because I have a bleeding heart when it comes to converts, and when I see a convert struggling, I want to do everything, and I want to fight their battles for them. And in many ways, Hashem creates these hurdles in the conversion process, and they need to go through those things, and they need
Right.
to do that. And I need to be careful and not be blinded as well. We all have that, you know, depending on
Right. Right. I'm saying
what
so.
life we're living, and the eyes, the goggles that we see things through.
Right, right. I know. So, because we have, like you said before, I like what you said. There's a genuine desire to be helpful, to do good. And unfortunately, it's grossly taken advantage of sometimes. So, going back to the deceit. So, this to me, at least with everything you've said, what I'm still hearing, and I know from my own experience, at least having grown up, in the Orthodox world, I still think for the most part we're protected. Would you suggest? I mean, would you agree with me on that? For the most part, I mean, there's always, like you said, the vulnerability, and as you go along and you find out more, you become more aware of where to be careful. But in general, my feeling is, and tell me if I'm wrong from what you said, is that the Ben Noach is even more vulnerable. So, what would you say to them? That's my feeling. That's what I'm surmising from all of this.
Um, the Ben Noach, I don't believe, are vulnerable to Christianity. The Ben Noach
To fake Judaism. What I'm saying is
are
fake
right
Judaism.
in the Jewish world. They're very much they've been knocked off the high horse that they were on. Their world is shattered. They're very vulnerable. They want to belong. They want to feel part of something. So to latch onto anything Jewish, any rabbi who's willing to teach, anything they can get their hands on, they're not always very discerning in what that is, and unfortunately there are people who will take advantage of that vulnerability anywhere, but that's in any situation. When you're vulnerable, you're open to that.
Wow. Wow. So going back to something you mentioned earlier, something about you said you make a annual conference for Bnei Noach. Is it specifically for Bnei Noach? Particularly for Bnei Noach?
It is not particularly for Bnei Noach.
I want you
Rabbi
to tell us
Singer's
more about
very involved. He's one of the main speakers. So it's a lot of people who have been through this journey, and in um, various stages of this journey. Some are just learning and trying to find out what is true and not true in Christianity. Some have completely left and are proud to be Bnei Noach. Some are considering conversion. Some are already converts. Um, we invite the Jewish community as well. Sometimes it's Jewish people who are involved in the Bnei Noach world, or more important, I think, is Jewish people who have questions about Christianity, or are on the fence and have a friend who's trying to pull them. If they come, they're going to get answers to their questions. So it's really it's not just for the Bnei Noach world, but Bnei happens to be built by Bnei Noach, because who better to monitor missionaries and to warn the Jewish world about the agenda behind evangelical Christianity than people who have been there and done that, and people who know that world. They're the ones who understand the language and often know the who's who and what to look for and where to get that information in order to protect Jewish communities. So they become my eyes and ears all over the world. People, Bnei Noach, ask how to help, and I tell them subscribe to the emails that are just in your surrounding area. Watch what's going on in the evangelical world. When you see a missionary coming from Israel, alert me, alert the local Jewish community when you see something that's going on that's problematic, or that the Jewish community is being targeted, or you hear chatter among the evangelical world about this covert missionary or this rabbi who's in the Jewish world. Those are things that we want to know about. And when every Noachide all over the world does that, we tend to have an army of people monitoring and protecting the Jewish community. And in many ways, Noachides find that very fulfilling and find that as a way to attach themselves to the Jewish people and in some way protect and help the Jewish people. And it's been very successful. Every case has involved a team of Bnei Noach who have gone through videos, who scoured social media accounts and gathered all of this information and done the investigations for us.
Wow. I'm looking at you and I'm thinking, she doesn't look that tough. She's a nice person. You're like this spiritual Mossad. You got your agents out there all over the world, spread out. That's an amazing network.
I'm not alone.
That's what I'm saying. No, I honestly, I got on. I tried to do some homework, but I'm like, Bnei, I saw some of your videos, but I thought you're the face of it. You do it. And I'm thinking, wow, how does she do so much single-handedly? And I hear you giving the credit to all those people out there, which is amazing. And it's very courageous on their part. They're doing something to help. And the second thought that came to my mind is maybe that's the answer to some of the questions we discussed earlier, to give them a sense of purpose. You have a purpose. You're saving the world. That's fantastic. Definitely. Can you give us more information?
And this is, I think, the most important way that Bnei Noach can use, knowledge that they didn't study this. They didn't strive to be a missionary. Many of them feel a real disgust for that world now. They're much like ex-smokers. They have a disdain, a disgust, and feel betrayed. And in this way, they can really just, I can't find another word, but really protect and defend the Jewish people in a big way.
Wow. So do I have time for a few more questions?
Sure.
Okay. So first of all, if you can share with us the info, where anybody watching this, where can they go to learn more about your organization and to get more involved? In other words, is there a website? I'm sure there is. If you can spell it out.
It's beneyneu.com, BEYNEYNU.com. Okay. There's an email, there's a WhatsApp group, there's a WhatsApp number that you can report things to. You can send me emails, social media accounts, things that you're concerned about.
Have you ever had, because it's public, the information, right? This information you just gave is public and it's been public already. Have you ever had any imposters trying to deliberately mislead you or or give you feed you false information or false reports? Just curious. I like these juicy type of questions.
Yes, for sure. Not every report is taken seriously. We seriously look at every report, but there do have to be real, legitimate red flags. We do have to find real smoking gun information. When it does get to a point where we have built quite a file of evidence, then we will bring in professional investigators, employ a professional genealogist, and then we get professionals involved, and we make sure that every statement we make, every allegation that is made, has a pile of evidence supporting it. So you can't just make a statement without having that evidence to back it up. You open yourself for tremendous lawsuits and liability, and these are people's lives. If we're wrong about a single piece of evidence, you've destroyed somebody's life. So you have to be really sure. And there are many cases that have not been fully exposed, that are still just cases that are pots cooking, and lots of just monitoring.
Wow. So if I was to go down the road of like forensic files, spy tales, what was like a good juicy story that you experienced that you can share with us? Something that happened, maybe not even recently, but something in your tenure is in what you're doing.
I think the stories that we've put out there so far are outrageous. The fact that the Dawsons for 12 years went through like 10 different states all across the US, never living in one place for more than a couple of years, and gradually building up this fake Jewish identity. That's outrageous. It's crazy. It's the things that Netflix specials are made out of. You have the Netflix specials of the the terrorists next door, like that are living among normal society. Those are juicy tales.
So what's coming to my mind as a father, of children, as a husband, as a responsible person. I'm like, wait, how do you move from state to state? I could never do that. I have to have my base. I have to have my roots. I have to be able to support myself. So that leads me to the question: who supports these people? Obviously, there's a network behind them that knows what they're doing and encourages it and is bankrolling it.
Right. The covert missionary efforts, the Jewish evangelism is heavily funded by the church. Each of these covert missionaries were connected to some organization that was funding covert missionaries. There are ones that are very open, that they will give you housing and a salary within the Jewish community if you're willing to take that position and that role. Wow. The Costellos were a perfect example. They are in the heart of the Jewish community in Chicago, and they were paid by Chosen People Ministries, and they get a salary, and they raise their children in the Jewish community, and it's a little crazy when you think about it. It's so unbelievable. They had difficulty getting journalists to cover it at first. Now it's story after story. Now everybody wants to know about it, but it was so unbelievable that people just didn't believe it could possibly be true.
Wow.
You asked, I think one of your questions was, how do we defend ourselves? And it's more than just the Jewish people putting up boundaries and being suspect. It's and protecting ourselves. Education is huge, because it's our own Bible that they're using against us. It's manipulations of Tanakh that they're using to lure Jews to Christianity. If we knew our own Bible, if we knew Tanakh, like we know other things. I think nobody would be able to fool us or, wrap something up and disguise it and pull it off.
Wow. This might sound like a crazy question. I mean, I think of weird things sometimes. I was wondering because you said about their modus operandi was to get integrated into the Jewish community. So essentially, some of them are raising their children in the Orthodox community, going to the Jewish schools and so on. Has there ever been a case, or is it at all possible? I don't know, plausible, possible, that one of those children is eventually going to genuinely convert to Judaism, or has it ever happened? Having grown up in that, and they feel like, no, that's where I want to be. I know it's
That's a
crazy.
danger on both sides.
Right.
We have Jews who are very connected in the Christian world that are raising their children among that environment. That's also a concern there. And definitely, there is a concern. And it happens. It happens a lot. I think we're seeing, more recently, the Messianic movement has actually backfired in many ways. And there are, I think, 90% of the conversions that are happening in the Jewish world are people from evangelical Christianity. So it's
Right. They started off.
Right. The trigger of learning Jewish traditions and learning to morph these Jewish culture and traditions and looking at Tanakh, looking at the Jewish world has triggered an obsession that sometimes people like myself go too far in learning and discover the truth.
Wow. You've opened up our eyes to so much. So what's your message for the Bnei Noach? I mean, you said so much, but if you had to sum up, what's your message? What would be your words of encouragement? Because, like you said, it's very difficult. It's harder, like you said, to be a Ben Noach than it is to fully convert to Judaism, in a sense. So, what would be your message?
It's hard. I know it's hard, but in many ways, they are like Avraham Avinu. To leave their family, leave their land, and leave everything they know to pursue one God and this life of living Torah. And I would encourage them to continue learning and don't stop learning and connecting to God. You have a genuine personal relationship with God now, like you've never had before. There is no intercessor. There's nothing between you and God now, and that itself should be fulfilling and connect to the Jewish community, connect to the enormous amount of resources that you can find online, and those other things. I really think if we recognize it as trauma and addictions and withdrawal, that we can find healthy outlets for fulfilling those needs and what we've been through.
Well, another question I'd like, if you don't mind answering before we conclude, especially you live in Israel and knowing what you know, do you ever see it as a dangerous thing, those alliances between like the Israeli government or, major Israeli organizations and some of the Christian organizations? And it all looks good on the outside. We're trying to help Israel. But I was always certain that there's an agenda. I mean, I'm hearing from you that I wasn't wrong.
Very much. There is an agenda, and those relationships are very much what I work towards alerting the Jewish community to, Jewish organizations, the government in Israel, politicians. We exposed a case not so long ago where Jewish agency had partnered with missionaries. It seemed like a great deal. These missionaries had this huge kibbutz complex where they had the buildings and means to handle Olim. They turned it into an absorption center and partnered with the Jewish agency, also taking care of lone soldiers, both very vulnerable communities, and under the auspice of Jewish agency, which is a legitimate
Right.
Jewish organization. So when we brought videos of those missionaries talking about how they were bringing Olim to Jesus and sharing the gospel with them and taking care of lone soldiers and showing them the love of Yeshua, that was shocking to the Jewish community. It was shocking to American Jewish communities. Federations stepped up and told Jewish Agency that this relationship needs to be severed immediately. And they, thank God, did sever that relationship. But it's very concerning. And many people feel that we're immune, and say, I would never convert. When the Mashiach arrives, we'll ask him if it's his first time or his second time, but until then, just take the money. I hear that a lot. And they are very supportive of lots of Jewish outreach and efforts and protecting Israel. And I think the non-Jewish world should and can support the Jewish community. But there comes a point where we have to say no, and we have to draw a line when it comes to proselytizing. And seeing that agenda and knowing that agenda, we can set up proper boundaries and guidelines in those relationships.
So would you encourage a Ben Noach to visit Israel? And
Definitely.
And B,
yes.
would that add to their connection to God, and how?
Come and let me know that you're coming, and experience Israel. I think it's very important for Bnei Noach to experience Israel through Jewish eyes. Connect to a Jewish tour group. I know the rabbi does Tanakh tours. Bnei Noach is looking to either host our conferences here or add on a tour to Israel, so you can learn Tanakh, here in the land where things actually happened.
Wow. You know what?
I think that would be great.
I feel like I have a million more questions, but it's not fair. You're a mother, you're a leader, you have a family, you have a life, and I know I'm looking at my clock, and by you it must be already 11:30 or 12:30 now at night. Right? No. Wow, you look like you just got up. You just started your day, and I know you must have a whole day behind you. I want to say, and you don't need my blessings, because by virtue of what you do, that it's just like the rabbi who said to his son, his departing words before he passed on was, "Your actions will be the ones that bring you honor." Right? It's your deeds. So certainly your deeds brings the blessings to you. And especially you have so much merit of just the things that you've mentioned just here, and I'm sure there's a lot more than that you've accomplished, and certainly will accomplish even more. And just by virtue of the people who watch this and be encouraged, So I want to say thank you so much, and I hope we can
thank you.
I'll already take a rain check for for another conversation. You see, a finger and they take a hand, right? Isn't that the way the adage goes? But Hashem should bless you. God should bless you. And thank you so much for the inspiration. I mean, I learned so much. I thought I'm going to come on here to teach others. And I have to say, and I say this humbly and gladly, I'm like, wow, I learned so much. I learned so much.
Thank you.
And I've watched a lot of your videos. So it's not like I didn't have background. I watched them. I love them. But I'm like, I don't know if I saw all of them, but I'm like, wow, this is inspiring. Thank you so much. And may God bless you.
Thank you. Kol Tov.
Kol Tov. Take care.